I'm curious how you handle the max effort work. Do you go for a true max? Do you do a build up over those waves, or use RPE to regulate, or do you just tell them to go for broke?
It's kind of RPE 9.5. I
Okay.
don't think it's necessary to go all the way. I have some clients who are a little bit crazy and they go all the way, and I don't mind that as long as they understand the risk involved. The way that I was always taught, Alex, was if I could take a weight confidently and I knew I could do an extra 5 kilos, because really, don't you? After you've had a max lift, you think, okay, I could have had 5 kilos. And some days you get out by the skin of your teeth and you think, there's no way I could have got any more than that. You don't have to take the weight. And let's face it, what is the benefit of taking that weight? You could potentially argue there's some benefit in learning how to fail, in grinding. I don't think the risk to reward ratio is worthwhile. So I feel 95% is enough. I don't feel we need to go to failure. Occasionally clients will, and I just try to get them not to do that on the more dangerous lifts. But what I'll do is, we'll go for a single up to about 95%. The back off will be on the consistent lift throughout.
Yeah. The discussion about not even just training to failure, but like gauging RPEs is one that I am constantly infuriated by, because it's something that is so necessary to talk about and is seemingly so simple. And I agree with you that I know, and and I'm sure many of your clients know, but one of the big things that makes me routinely want to quit online coaching is the difficulty I have either explaining it to people or getting them to fall right into the pocket. Now, that's not all their fault. It changes dramatically from person to person. I know people that will grind at an RPE 6 and continue to grind all the way up to a max, and it looks pretty similar. They're like human forklifts. And I know other people that are explosive. You can put 500 pounds on their back and they'll pop it up, and then 505, goes up and comes right back down. So there's a lot of variation, makes it very hard to deal with. And it almost seems like you need safeguards. So I have a lot of people that still try to infuse the 90% training max that Wendler made popular, which, fair enough. But then you're trying to do like inception layers of, well, this is what I think you can do, and this is what we're working with. And it's like, anyways, it gets very challenging. Do you have any mechanisms you use to try to standardize that effort, or do you kind of leave it up to the interpretation of the people you coach?
I'll be honest with you, and I'll just say this. When Mike T first came out with the RPE scale, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I rejected it for such a long time. I just hated it. It just wasn't the language we used back then. So I hated it. And I've never said that in public before, but I love Mike T. He's great. Can't pronounce his surname for the life of me, but I love him. But like I just rejected the RPE scale for ages. But what I realized when I started coaching was you need to have a language. That's what it's all about. You need to have a language. You need to be able to speak the same. Like for you and I to sit here and discuss in shorthand what we mean about taking a lift to the limit or keeping a bit in the tank, we need to have some type of language. And then an advancement of that language, we need to have a scale to say, okay, well, how far off are we? How close are we? So the more I coach people, and this was coaching either in person or coaching sort of long distance online, the more I realized it was just a language. And I've been on this push recently on my channel about RIR. And it's for the same reason. It's a necessary evil. Like if I'm coaching people online, if we're discussing things in a uniform sense, we need to have a language. In the same way, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, in hypertrophy research, Matthias Wernbaum measured volume in number of repetitions. Now we don't do that anymore. It's crazy. In fact, now we're talking about effective reps. So the last 5 reps maybe is what we should be counting. But the thing is, we need a language to be able to advance these discussions. So I hated Mike T's RPE to begin with, but I've really come to appreciate as I coach more and more, we need to have a language, because if we don't, then we are starting afresh with every person, with every client I have. I need to start from the ground up to say, hey, I want you to lift to be this way. And there's far too much room for error and it takes too long. So it pays in a field like ours to have a universal language. So I have bent to the RIR and our RPE juggernauts. And so yeah, I am well into that. So I guess the first thing that I would do for clients is, and this is part of my push on my YouTube recently, is to explain what RIR is, the value in it, why we use it. Because I think ultimately when people hear RIR, they just think easy work. They just blanket to go, oh, that's just easy work. We don't just take it to failure all the time. And that's the way forward. And it was the same way that I thought of RPE. I just thought it was really misunderstood it initially, and I never used it for the first few years. So when I discuss it now, I do like to put an RP on it, but if it's with clients, I will explain it further. So in the case of a recent client who's pulling a deadlift, I will just say to him, look, go all out. Don't go to the point where you're going to hurt yourself. It's something. It's more descriptive, and it's gonna resonate differently with different people, because I can tell him 9.5, but I also have to add that in because I know his personality, and he's very reckless, he's very aggressive, he's very big, he's very strong. With others, I might have to say, go to 9.5, push yourself a little bit, maybe just leave it all on the platform here. So there's a bit of explanation, but I think the starting point of the language is crucial. I'm fully into that now. I think you have to have a language to speak about these features.
Yeah, there's no way around that learning curve. I mean, psychology, like you just said, that's a huge point. I have probably just as many people that refuse to push the effort, where I have to kind of coax or trick them into working hard. You know, their governor is on a little too hard and they're leaving stuff on the table. I have probably just as many of those as the number of people who are an imminent threat to their own safety.
Yeah.
I have one kid, shout out to Justin Kim, who's one of my clients. I told him to do an RPE 8 deadlift for like a top set of 5. And he sent me, he's like, yeah, these move pretty well. And he sent me, it was a 50-second long video where he was taking, 8 to 10 seconds in between each rep. It looked like a series of singles, and he didn't lock the last one out. So effectively, it was like 95% he did for a set of 5. And I had to have this long lecture. And there's no way around that. You have to learn what RP is some way. So I guess those moments you overreach are still valuable in the grand scheme of things. There's no perfect way to get it without, I think, bleeding outside of the lines a little bit. But I spent so much time trying to interpret percentage-based programs when I was younger and not really understanding how this specific arrangement of weight sets and reps would work over the entire period of time. Like, how hard were you supposed to be working? How is that effort supposed to change? Was everything supposed to be just as hard? And especially, how does that encompass everybody? Because anybody who follows this one percentage-based program is going to experience that weight differently. And it took quite a while before I intuited that, oh, well, that's just something they didn't try to account for, that the percentage presupposes an RPE given a certain max, and that's kind of baked in. And if it doesn't line up with where you're at, it's like, well, tough shit, just keep your fingers crossed and hope for the best.
Yeah, they always used to crush me. I fell out of favor with the percentage-based programs very early on, until I learned to do my own percentages. For me, the percentages I built on were a lot lower than what I eventually ended up as a max with, whatever that means for my lifting prowess. But I peaked a 255 squat off a 180 for 8 set. So my ability to max was far in excess of my ability to rep, but I really like reps. I responded well to them. So training was very unusual. I didn't like to spend very long at the high percentages because I would get beat up really quickly. I do think I'm not really, despite my numbers, I'm not sure I'm built for strength, but very small joints and everything, sort of light structure. I'm probably built more for bodybuilding. But for the strength I peaked, I managed to do it off a lot of repetition work. And I seemed to get really good carryover in singles. So in the early days, I was getting crushed by these percentage programs because they were far higher, probably 10% higher than I needed. So every time it got to the max, I was already burnt out, never worked out for me. And so most of the time, I just learned my own language, and I learned to work more intuitively. And that was really where I got my strongest, was when I did mostly intuitive training.
That's a different dimension of complexity that layers on top of it. I mean, let's standardize how hard you're actually working relative to the other guy. Now let's try to figure out whether or not you need to work that hard or that heavy, given all of your predispositions. And it wasn't until recently, and I'd kind of heard it before, but it didn't really click when I was trying to figure out how to massage programs for different people. We're all trying to predict what's going to happen with a new client, and it rarely goes the way we want it to. And there's trial and error involved and so on. But hearing like Josh Bryant talk about like fast gainers and slow gainers, considering what explosive athletes can probably get away with, when I consider someone like Chad Smith, right, who was a huge squatter, and he routinely said, I won't get within 100 pounds of my opener. going into a meet. It's all sub max rep work, and he gets these huge swings on the back end and he can recover from them. Whereas somebody else might absolutely require all of the heavy, like neurologically specific work. And I think that's the thing that fascinates me. That's the thing I wish science was trying to attack and predict and kind of standardize. But I don't think we're anywhere near those studies becoming a thing.
Yeah, I was a bit more like Chad. So in my early days, before I really got into powerlifting, sort of towards the end, I would take a deload and I would come back stronger. So I could train up until the point where I couldn't lift anything close to what I was lifting the previous week. So I remember days before needing a deload, going in, not even be able to lift a 2-plate deadlift off the floor. I was just so wiped. And then I'd take a deload week and I'd actually come back stronger and hit a PR. So my early training was very unusual, but it was very specific to me and it worked quite well. I deloaded a lot more than people normally recommend. And this was back in 2002. Have you heard of a strength coach called Dan John?
Yeah. Yeah. I've read some of his books.
Dan's great. So I went back in 2002. I had just come out of my sort of beginner phase. I'd been training for a couple of years. I had reasonable lifts. So about a 200 bench, reasonable, 350 squat, and about a 400 deadlift. And I'd been competing. I'd competed a couple of times already with that embarrassing bench. So, and I couldn't push it further. And even despite weight gain and everything else, I just couldn't push it further. And I was very much a low volume trainer. I came from the hard gainer school. Do you remember those guys? Yeah, God, absolute horrible school of thought. And I actually used to write for them as well, terrible stuff. But anyway, so then I started to explore because I realized that just wasn't working, the low volume stuff. And I emailed Dan John and I said, look, Dan, I just keep getting hurt or injured. I'm not progressing. What do I do? And I didn't know, because I was just some kid from Derby, England, that Dan John, this huge Dan John, would message me back. And he did. He messaged me back that very afternoon. And he told me, he said, yeah, this is what you do. Look in your training diary and just try and figure out if there's a pattern for when you get injured, when you get ill, when do things go wrong? And I was like, okay, Dan, I'll do that. Went away, checked my logs, paper records for the past 3 years, checked them all. And lo and behold, every third week, something would happen. I'd get snapped up, I'd get ill, because you know what it's like when you're young, you don't really get hurt, you just get ill. And so something would happen. I was like, Dan, emailed it back. This is what happens. I said, okay, great. Every third week, I want you to deload. And that was the best run of training that I had. I would just train like an absolute maniac for 2 weeks. Everything was heavy max singles, heavy max fives, some back off works in the 10, but not much. Everything was to failure pretty much except for the singles. And then I would need a deload every third week, come back and I'd be stronger. And in that sort of 18 months, that was probably the best run of strength that I had ever. So that was something that worked for me very early on.